Hi, he's Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine.
For the identity of the real Marty Levinson, stay tuned to the Northtown News Magazine.
Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Back to that lemon light city, sweet home Chicago.
Hi, I'm Marty Levinson. Welcome to the Northtown News Magazine show with the greatest cameraman around, Sonny Hirsch, and your host of all hosts, Avi Myers. Thank you, Marty. Avi Myers, Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine. Presentation of Sonny Hirsch and myself. Dial us up on the web, www.ntnm.org. Shows on YouTube. About 170,000 shows watched. 70,000 of them or so this year. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. We're real big on CAPS. To find out where your neighborhood meeting is, go to caps24.org in Rogers Park, West Rogers Park, and Edgewater. He had a really fun day yesterday as we filmed this. It's a couple weeks earlier. Was it Joe Barrios' swearing-in ceremony, which was really nice, and Maria Pappas gave the show a real nice certificate. We want to thank her for it, as well as we want to say thank you to Dave Drucker and Elizabeth Kaufman over at the Secretary of State's office. And anyway, a good time was had by all. And thank you, Pat Michalski, who arranged everything for Marie Pappas. I do appreciate it. We had a judicial election not that long ago, and we want to do a judicial review and figure out what happened. So our judicial expert on the air is Michael Strom. And Michael, pleasure to have you here.
Always a pleasure, Avi.
Okay, and your Marty Levinson was just seen prior, so people get to rate that. Why don't you fill us in?
Well, you had contacted me about judicial retention, and my first reaction was, judicial retention, what a snooze. Nobody's been rejected in 20 years. And then I thought about it for another second, and I realized this is going to be a problem. Because although nothing weird wound up happening in Cook County, there was something a little bit ominous for one of the Illinois Supreme Court races, and something uber having trouble with my consonants there. But the Iowa Supreme Court, I don't know if you noticed this, 3 Iowa Supreme Court justices were rejected on their retention because a group that's unhappy about rulings on gay marriage decided to just throw them all out.
Wow.
So they had 7 members on the Iowa Supreme Court. As we speak, they have 4, and they're trying to figure out how to get from 4 to 7. That's a bit much of a transition for any court, and certainly the Supreme Court of a state, and particularly if all of a sudden this is going to become a hyper-politicized situation where there's that kind of scrutiny, not from are you smart enough to do this job, do you have the background, but I don't know, buddy, how do you feel about these issues? Because nobody knows more about judicial elections than you with all the shows you've done over the years, Avi. But one of the real cardinal rules...
He knows a lot more than I do.
I know some things. One of the cardinal rules is you're not even supposed to talk about how you're going to rule, because then you're prejudging a case that you haven't heard the evidence, you haven't heard both sides of the case, or both arguments of counsel in the appellate court where they don't hear evidence. And if this is now going to be some sort of political deal breaker, and you're going to have floodgates open for all sorts of special interest groups to decide what they want on their bench. And heaven forbid, we're going to have people campaigning on issues, on how they're feeling about this stuff.
The wrong kind of politics. That's really interesting. And, you would really think, given the fact that Iowa is one of the highest states in pork production, there'd be no trouble finding elected officials over there. But, bad joke. But, you know what? This is a very serious point you're bringing up.
Now, we had a little bit of this here. You might not have been aware of it because the district wasn't a Cook County district, but with Justice Kilbride.
I'm a little bit aware, and as it turns out, as a matter of fact, one of my, not just Facebook friends, but if you open up our YouTube page, there's a comment from Bridget Dooley. She actually was working for on that case. I'm not sure which side though.
Well, in that instance, the hubbub about Kilbride is there's an organization you may be aware of, the Illinois Civil Justice League, which is essentially a group that looks at the judicial branch in terms of how their rulings affect businesses. Kind of, well, like the sort of organizations that the Democrats were complaining about nationally, but more focused in terms of they really scrutinize court rulings, what the courts are doing, and how it affects regular businesses. So they were peeved that, I think specifically that the medical malpractice cap legislation was held unconstitutional. I believe that was last year, and they were essentially looking for somebody to take it out on. Kilbride was one of the justices who voted that the law was unconstitutional, which wasn't really all that surprising for folks who've been following that area of the law, because it, not 100%, but it follows in large part a ruling that was made 20 years ago.
Now, I would assume that this has got to be an area of expertise for you.
I know a little bit, although personally I haven't done very much medical mal litigation, but it's another branch of the tort stuff. We see a little bit of it at our office, but nothing that caps would affect. But in this instance, the Civil Justice League decided that the best way to express their displeasure would be to mount a vigorous political campaign opposing Kilbride on his retention election, the same election that we had, just the general election in November. And they didn't campaign on that issue because they knew it was going to be a little bit of a snooze in terms of really getting folks to grab their pitchforks and torches. So they went after him on his rulings on criminal cases, including some advertisements that included folks, not actual criminals, I presume, but portraying the role of criminals, thanking Justice Kilbride for his rulings that turned them loose on the streets, subtle stuff like that. And they poured money into it, which meant that the trial lawyers and those who are politically, friends of the plaintiff's personal injury bar, no secret here, much of the local Democrats here enjoy some contributions from that side of the divide.
Wow.
So,
really?
But it became an issue that was drawing national money into this downstate area where that is Kilbride's district. As you probably know, 3 of the justices are elected out of Cook County, and the others are elected out of other districts that are drawn around the state. So Kilbride you didn't have a chance to vote on, but the folks who were in his district got just blanketed by advertisements. So it's kind of the worst of both worlds, because the motivation was completely political and very narrowly focused, but they didn't even campaign on that issue. They just looked for something else that might be better. Anything that would be good to hit them with would be a good implement to pick up.
Interesting.
Now, one of the things that I look at, as you know, I look at the numbers when we vote on judges.
And thoroughly.
I try to. I'm not going to tell you that this is radically new, but people focus on the fact that nobody's missed retention since 1990, and it's 60% that you need for retention. And the other side of the coin is that there is a very substantial block that just votes to take everybody out. Nobody, not one single judge on what you know to be a very long list of judges in Cook County, got more than 80%. I'm not saying 81, I'm saying no more than 80%. Now,
That's
you look
interesting.
at the list of judges who were up for retention this time around. There's a number that belong, on the Hall of Fame. There's a number that would be among the highest ranks of the judiciary in Cook County, and 20%. It's the same kind of unthinking thing that we criticize people for on the other side. Saying, oh, you're just rolling over on everybody. But
When
how
I
is
first
it
started
possible?
voting, I did stuff like that.
How is
After
it-
Greylord.
Well, okay, and that was a systemic problem, and you could make arguments on either side that maybe you want to be, a little bit more. You want to do ready, aim, fire rather than the opposite. But in terms of the
just to
current
technically correct
situation,
myself, I'm sorry because I didn't want to interrupt you. It was actually when I covered criminal courts at the 26th in California, and I got to hear what some of the insiders had to say about the judicial judges working there at the time. But this is more than 30 years ago.
it's a very different judiciary now. In the time that I've been practicing, it's really, I don't want to say night and day, but we have a much, in my personal humble opinion, we have a much higher quality across the board of judiciary than we did back in the day.
I would hope so. As a matter of fact, one of the people down there, I used to say that you could count the number of honest judges there on the hand of three-fingered Mordecai Brown.
Not commenting on that.
Okay.
But so if absolutely everybody is, okay, you're starting out 20% are against you just because you are a judge and you're on the retention ballot, it gets kind of sobering that if there is similar sort of political movement here in Cook County, and somebody decides, you know what, the only way we're going to ever have an impact is to just do the same sort of broad brush approach and just have them vote everybody out. Avi, that would be a nightmare for the administration of justice in Cook County. To have all of the judges voted out. To me, it's chilling to have 3 of 7 Iowa Supreme Court justices voted out, but you have judges handling high volume courtrooms. What are they going to do? Presumably, if you have that many judges voted out at one time, you really can't have the Supreme Court just appoint them back in. Politically, that'd be chaotic too. In terms of just what happens the day after the swearing in or swearing out, is depending on how you look at it for retention. Who's handling the calls? You have domestic violence courtrooms. Are we going to just plug new people into those slots and hope for the best? Ouch. 26th in California the day after. I don't know.
Wow. That would be a nightmare.
I think so. There's of the judicial elections that get no visibility as it is, the retention elections get maybe about a third of that. So we're kind of cutting atoms here in terms of the visibility of judicial retention elections. But good Lord, we're going to have to wind up someday with big money campaigns on both sides. Throw them all out, no, keep them all in.
Yeah, by the way, while I think of it, I just want to give my condolences to Michael Bender and the rest of the Benders on the loss of Judge Gerald Bender, who was an extremely outstanding individual, who did so much, not just as a judge who would talk about Hall of Fame and legends, which we were earlier, but for all the stuff he did for Simon Wiesenthal as his pro bono lawyer for many years.
I'm not saying anything on camera that I didn't say to the family. Judge Gerald Bender was a giant in our community, not just in the judicial community, not just the legal community, but both of those. But as a human being, as somebody who his greatness was widely known and he wore it lightly.
Anytime I'd see him, it was a good day. I always enjoyed running into him very much, and I want to give my condolences. Let's get back to, we've got about 5.5, 6 minutes here, so, okay. Educate us.
We had in the last election, there were usually you get somewhere in the area of 3 to 5 judges who draw enough attention from the evaluation process that they get targets on their backs, and they get the lower totals. The Tribune wants to put a harpoon in them. Maybe some of the other groups that are actually passing out pound cards or making endorsements or evaluations or what have you, the IVI, IPO, organizations like that.
In Jewish Chicago, I was basically told by my experts to go with the Chicago Bar Association, which was 4 people that they didn't want, and we went with those 4. By the way, I actually did vote for every single person in Jewish Chicago that I endorsed, which is the first time I've ever done that, by the way, or I said I was going to vote for.
And eventually voted for some of them that you excoriated in Jewish Chicago.
And yes, Steve Bernstein, I voted for you. I absolutely positive. I told you I was going to vote for you, and I voted for you. So I did. And you are a nice guy. But
it's still a secret ballot, though, isn't it, Steve?
In any event, oh, and by the way, Jewish Chicago is coming out for the. We don't usually come out for the aldermanic or mayoral elections, but there are so many people running. I'll take my chances on being able to get enough advertising to actually make a nickel or two. So there will be a Jewish Chicago coming out for the aldermanic and mayoral elections, and no judges in that election, except election judges.
True. No, from this point on, we're looking at appointments for vacancies. And the associate judge process starts again, which is one of the reasons why you won't hear me saying anything specific about any particular judges other than obviously Jerry Bender, who's just a magnificent human being. But I would have a conflict of interest at this point since I am a filed my papers for the associate race that is coming up in the vague, uncertain future. So I will have to be speaking to every one of the full circuit court justices, so would not be a real good idea for me to be saying unkind things about them on camera, and for the most part I wouldn't be inclined to anyway.
And as a result, because of the sanctity of the judiciary, I'm not even going to tell people to vote early and often for you. But you'd make a damn good judge, that's for sure.
Well, thank you, Avi. You've certainly seen a lot of judges. I think you know one when you see one. So I will take that in the spirit in which it is offered, with no disrespect to those who you've not shared that happy feeling about. Avi often mentions that I'm one of the people that advises him. What he doesn't mention is that he doesn't do what I advise him.
Well, there's still a vote. I mean, in other words, you're not the only person advising.
I'm not in there pulling the levers for you or punching the chads, but you're still a work in progress, Avi. I haven't given up on you.
Okay. Well, no, I appreciate it. And by the way, I do learn a lot from you. And, it's a really interesting area. And the fact of the matter is that in many ways, you really got me started, getting more interested. When we started talking about, when you did run a number of years back and we were talking at Larry Suffordin's July 4th, whatever, that dialogue actually clicked in more than you know, and it really got me interested in the process. And I remember...
I want to apologize to a number of people who've obviously treated badly during this process. If I'd have known this, I never would have talked with them.
And by the way, I still remember when we were talking, when this table was actually the dining room table in my house, and still is, after the TV show. I still remember when you came here to advertise, and we were actually talking about what was what and who was who, and you had the highest ratings of any candidate in the race.
And that cinched my endorsement in Jewish Chicago, didn't it, Avi? Oh, yeah. Wait, no, not so much.
Yeah, no, it was Mendy Singer. It was a thing in the community. That was an interesting election, too, the wrong way. Speaking of people who were cinched. You know, one of the people that I wrote about in that issue, I actually found out that this person's mother was actually taking Jewish Chicago's off the shelves in as many places as they could possibly find.
Somebody had to.
Well, we've got a minute for your closing statement here.
I wish I had something really nice to say, but I can tell you that I'm seeing kind of waves lapping up on the beach here with judicial retention becoming more politicized, with the temptation being for judges to get more political about the positions that they're taking, maybe thinking twice about some of the opinions that they're issuing. That's not the way we're supposed to be doing it. That's exactly the opposite. We are putting judges in violation, essentially, of judicial canons of ethics by putting them in a position where they're under that type of scrutiny. It's completely wrong. I'm against it, and we ought to stop it.
I want to thank you very much, Michael Strom. It's always a pleasure to have you on the show. We're actually filming on the 7th night of Hanukkah, so we're going to hopefully be smoking some latkes right afterwards. But I want to thank my entire technical crew, Sonny Hirsch. I want to thank all of you for joining us. And it'll be aldermanic and mayoral time from here on in. Thanks so much, Michael. I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with people.
You know, a lot of people ask me what you're smoking. It's latkes.
The cinnamon's the key.